Welcome to Bigfoot Society. If you have Bigfoot activity to report from the same areas discussed in this episode, please reach out to me directly after this episode. And if you'd like to be on the podcast to discuss a personal Bigfoot encounter, please reach out to me directly at bigfootsociety@gmail.com. Do you wish there was more Bigfoot Society to listen to every week? Well, there is now. If you become a supporting member over at Patreon, you get a special members-only episode every single week on Wednesdays, and sometimes even more episodes. Head on over to patreon.com/the Bigfoot Society. And now let's get on with the show. All right, Bigfoot Society, I've got the privilege of talking to Mr. Don Neal today, and you might know him in the community by his nickname Biggyfoot. But Don, welcome to the show today. How's it going?
It's doing wonderful. A little hoarse, but I'm doing good. Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, we were just talking, and I'm getting over some stuff myself, and I'm sure half the listeners are as well. It's going around the U.S., but you know, you've got a really cool bio you provided, and we don't really get amazing bios like this. I just want to mention it to the side, but you've got some really cool things that you have in your past besides Bigfoot. You're a licensed minister, pastor, for 53 years. You're a honorary Kentucky colonel, which is awesome.
Yes.
And you've got the presidential flags and wings lapel pin from Colin Powell under George W. Bush, which is awesome. And of course, you've been officially researching Bigfoot since 2007. So almost 20 years, which is incredible. So, but you know,
yes.
I would love to start, you know, where I usually start when I'm talking to individuals that have been in the community for such a long time. That was there a certain event or a thing that brought you into Bigfooting to begin with?
Yes, sir. Absolutely. Well, like most people, as a child, I was interested in who was Bigfoot, you know, extraterrestrials, anything like that was just amazing. To our little minds, you know. So I remember watching In Search Of and many different programs. So I'm old enough to remember when the Patterson-Gimlin film came out and it was released, and what made it different than everything else, I thought, oh no, this thing that's supposed to be, you know, science fiction is possibly really true. And that just piqued my interest, and I zeroed in on Bigfoot probably at the age of 13. So that would have been somewhere around 67, 68. So I've always had that interest, but I can't say I was a researcher. But I started preaching at the age of 17 years old. Awful young, but I started out 17 years old. Today I'm 70, so 53 years. But I began traveling 38 states in the United States and Canada and Mexico. I've traveled quite a bit, been blessed to be able to preach. And so, of course, when I'm preaching, evangelizing, I'm preaching at nighttime. So my days are free. And so I love going around meeting people. And I would ask, I wasn't ashamed at all. I'm a minister of the gospel, but you know, I'm also interested. I love my mind's open to a lot of things. And so I would ask people in the communities, you know, you ever have anything unusual going on? I've heard paranormal stories, you know, and I've heard different things, but it seemed like I would always run into Bigfoot stories. And for an example, I was preaching in Upper New York and got to speak to some loggers. And I said, you know, anything weird? You see some weird things up there in these woods? And they said, oh, yeah, we see Bigfoot tracks all the time. I would love to say I was a researcher then, and I should have been taking notes, and I should have had a recorder. But again, I'm a full-time minister. This is just something, I'm one of them things Bigfoot researchers say, I'm an armchair researcher. You know, I do it on my spare time. I have a career. I have a calling in my life, which is the ministry. But I sure was interested in Bigfoot. But all the stories I should have written down. Then I found myself preaching in Florida by the Ocala National Forest. And one day while I was out observing the forest, I ran into a park ranger. And so I was talking to him. And of course, I go, hey, you ever see anything unusual and weird down here? And he said, yeah, you know, we have Bigfoots around here. And he began telling me about sightings they have and how many of the park rangers cannot talk about it. They're not allowed to talk about it. And you know, again, you'll hear me say it 100 times. I wish, why didn't I write these things down? So over the years, since the age of 13, I've been, and 17 years old when I started the ministry, I've been kind of doing research. Then I began to preach to the American Indians out west in New Mexico and Oklahoma and Arizona. And I got to go on the Indian reservations and stay for a week at a time. And you have to be welcomed by the Indian chiefs. If you're there doing business, they call it, I'm going to be in the community receiving an offering from the Indians, and we're going to minister to the Indians. So I have to be okayed for entrance and to be there. And of course, their offerings was, I had many revivals on the Indian reservations where they brought us live chickens and corn and fried bread, they called it. And we would receive that, and the next day we'd feed that food to the homeless Indians and the hungry people there in the community. We didn't keep any of it. So in meeting the Indian chiefs, I got to know them, and I'd say, hey, I'm Cherokee Indian, my family's Cherokee Indian, and I always have loved that. I'd say, tell me some unusual stories. Tell me if I'm just interested in anything. Well, they'd tell me about the tall man. I mean, I'm talking about over years of time, different chiefs of the Apache tribe and the Cherokee and the Chippewa, not all at one time. And that even makes it better to me. I love when these things are spontaneous. But they'd say, oh, yeah, the big man of the mountains or the hairy man of the woods, or, and I'd say, and they would describe this 6 to 7 foot tall, hair-covered creature that walked upright like a man. And so I kept going, man, everywhere I go, and so I got to minister to cowboys back in the 70s out in far west Texas. There were literally cowboys who literally stayed on the range, on the trail, 6 and 7 days at a time. They'd stay in cabins out in remote areas. They were running the fence wire and stuff, and got to talking to them. They tell me about wolves that they had shot or killed, or some big bear story, different places I was at, Montana, Wyoming. Anyway, it would always come back to a Bigfoot. And it's like it would just follow me everywhere I went. And so I was always interested. So I settled down and started the church that I now pastor. I started my own church and a little organization, and I'm here in Kentucky where I'm from. And so in 2000, so around 2007, I heard about the BFRO and Bigfoot, and I thought, well, I want to go to one of their expeditions. And I went to the expedition and met Harold Binney, that you were speaking to recently, and I went to one of their BFRO expeditions in the Shawnee National Forest around Garden of the Gods. And that's when I heard my literal first Bigfoot return howl. Somebody made a howl, and this Bigfoot returned the howl and made the hairs, and I was hopelessly hooked. But one major thing I left out, because I sure get to talking, is what literally pushed me into the world of Bigfoot is when a young man, but when I was 17, started the ministry. Every year I was in a large organization or church organization. Once a year we would meet in Louisville, Kentucky, ministers from all the 50 states that would meet, and we'd have a week-long convention. And during that week, we'd have a big dinner, and all the ministers, I'd meet ministers from, Washington State and from California and from Florida, and we'd all get together, people I didn't usually get to meet. Now imagine all these ministers were wearing suits and ties and three-piece suits, and there was this one cool preacher. He was so cool. He preached on the Indian reservation. I believe he was in Wyoming, in that area, and he was married to an Indian woman. And this guy would come to these conventions wearing buckskin jacket and blue jeans and cowboy boots and a cowboy hat. And he was like Clint Eastwood to me. I'm 18, 19-year-old minister. I'm like, man, this guy's so cool. I won't give his name, but he was just the coolest guy. He didn't care to dress in the suits and the ties. He wore his clothes, and he would minister to the Indians. And so I got to know this man, and one of the conventions, I got to sit at the table, 8 or 10 ministers, and he was one of them. Well, I made sure and get a seat just as close to him as I could, and I wanted to just talk to him because he was like I said, a modern-day cowboy. And I come to find out the story was he would literally preach to the Indians on Sunday, and then he'd load up his pack mules and his team on Monday and go out into the mountains that he would hunt for the different wild animals and keep their pelts and sold their hides, and he lived off the land. And he'd come back on the weekends there in this local community, and he'd preach to the Indians. Well, I'm just hopelessly hooked. This guy's like my hero, I'm just so amazed. So we're sitting there talking nonchalantly, and I said, his name was Johnny. And I said, Johnny, I know you've seen bears and elks, and you've had a lot of unusual situations. He got lost one time and was out in the woods a couple of days, lost till he found his way back where he was supposed to be. And he was an expert marksman. And you stop me if I go too long here. And he was a man's man. He was a modern day cowboy. And he just so matter of factly said, well, the weirdest thing I ever saw was a Bigfoot. And I'll go, what? He said, yes. Well, all the table gets quiet. All the ministers, everybody's looking like this guy can't be serious. And I said, please tell me more. And he told me the most amazing story. I'll never forget it. that he was out hunting and he had found a place on a little mesa that was high above it, raised up several hundred feet. And he had found a place on the rock side of this mesa. He could settle into the rocks and he could rest his gun for a good holding pattern to sight in on the animals he was shooting. He'd been there 3 or 4 days and got several animals. He'd go down and get them, bring them back up to where he was at that higher elevation, skin them, clean them. He'd eat their meat. That was his food while he was there. And he said, I'm not going to leave this spot. I'm in a good spot. So it's overlooking a valley. There's about a 400-yard field, a clearing down there, some kind of weed or grass that the animals kept eating. And he went down there and got settled in his rocky spot on this rock cliff, and he settled in got his canned feed. And he said, early morning, this sun up, he said, I seen something in my peripheral vision walk out into this field. And he said, the first thing I noticed, it's walking upright like a man. And he said, what in the world can this be? And he said, real still, he said, there's no way I could be seen. This is important to the story. He said, I'm camouflaged. I'm sitting in these rocks. There's no way I can be seen. I'm 300 or 400 feet high looking down at this field. And this thing comes walking, swinging its arms, 7 to 8 foot tall, solid black from head to toe, and is swinging its arms extremely like with extreme swinging motion. And it stops in the center of this field and reaches down and starts grabbing these weeds and pulling them up, and it's eating the roots. He could see the dirt clumps on the ball of these weeds, and whatever it was, this creature was eating them. So he thought it's not a man, but he at the time wasn't sure what it was. So this expert marksman, and he's got this big gun, I don't know, he was telling the gun it was powerful enough to bring down bears or any big creature, moose or anything. And he's got a super scope, and he raises it up, puts it on his creature, and he says, this thing's got 2 arms and 2 legs, gigantic feet. You can barely see them in the grass, but he sees its feet when it's walking. And he said, this thing's neck goes right into its shoulders. This is my first experience with a live eyewitness. And I'm sitting there fixated. I'm not even breathing, I think. I'm just so listening to what he's saying. And he said, so I raised my scope up, and I'm thinking, do I shoot this thing or not? And he said, I believe that with the power scope I had and the power gun, I could kill this thing. But he said, as I raised the scope up and got it to its face, he said, I let my finger off the trigger because he said, I was looking into the face of a human-looking creature. He said that the rest of it looked like gorilla, the rest of it looked like animal, but its face was human. And he said, I let go of the trigger and thought, there's no way I could kill this thing. Impossible. And he said, then it did the most amazing thing. Well, I'm thinking, first of all, you're telling me you've seen a Bigfoot. What could be more amazing than that? And he said, I'm sure I'm hidden in these rocks. I know I can't be seen. And I've got it right in the scope. And he said, that creature stopped chewing, stopped doing what it was doing, and turned and looked straight up at me like it was looking straight through me at that scope. He said, and I thought, there's no way it could see me. He said, it dropped that grass and turned, and at a walking pace, which was equal to him running, it went and left out of that field and was gone. And I'm ruined for the rest of my life because that just blew me away. That was just amazing. So add that to the rest of the story. So I go through all the years, and I'm, asking people about Bigfoot, and I read all these stories. So in 2007, back to modern times, I go to the the BFRO expedition in Garden of the Gods. I meet Harold Biddy. I hear my first return howl, and the second night we got return knocks, and that's when I thought, I'm going to become a researcher. Again, I can't do it full time. I don't get to do it, all the time, but I do it as much as I can, and I've been very blessed. I believe God has blessed me that I get to be involved in a lot of these expeditions. And I started doing several expeditions with the BFRO. Then I found my problem was I don't have a lot of free time. I'm a full-time minister, evangelist, pastor of my own church, got a family to raise. So I thought I need to Bigfoot in Kentucky. I can't keep going to Illinois. I've been to Illinois, Ohio, Tennessee, Indiana, but I can't keep going, 3 or 4 day expeditions. I've got to be home every Sunday. That's my busiest work day of the week. So I found a group called the KBRO, the Kentucky Bigfoot Research Organization, which is led by Mr. Charlie Raymond. And I contacted him and told him what I was interested in, and I'd been to some BFRO expeditions. He was so kind. He was so free. I can't speak well enough about him. He said, sure, come and go with us on an expedition. And I got to meet him, and we began talking. It wasn't very long. He said, would you like to be invited to be a researcher and investigator for the KBRO, and you can take care of the Western Kentucky portion of the state for me. And I just could not believe he offered me. I was so honored. And so I've been doing that since around 2007 or 8, somewhere along that line. That's when I got my first FLIR camera. I went and got a FLIR thermal camera and got into it and began to interview people. So I like to tell people that right off the bat, I myself have never actually seen a Bigfoot. And a lot of people don't like that. If you haven't seen one, you're not part of that in group. But what I like to tell people is that I have experienced, I feel like, everything that you can experience in the world of Bigfoot research, with the exception of having a visual daytime sighting. I have had hits on my thermal camera that I am 90% sure is Bigfoot. I've had them howl and scream and whistle and grunt. I've heard their gibbering talk. I've seen their eyes shine at night, been surrounded by more than one on several occasions. I've had them push down trees near me and hear them run off bipedal steps. I've found their footprints, which my wife and I have found their scat. And over time, I think I thought back on it, and I believe since when I was a young man until now, which I now record all of my interviews with eyewitnesses, I've interviewed around 100 people, a little over 100 eyewitnesses from all walks of life. And the eyewitnesses are why I really believe in Bigfoot. Not the howls I've heard, not the footprints I found, not even the scat we found, but the eyewitnesses. And I believe in people. I love people. I studied a little in psychology before I became a minister. And in my high school, that was some of my studies with psychology. I love speaking to people, studying people, and watching people. So I love to interview people, these eyewitnesses. And I'm going into another part of my story. You stop me at any time. But when I got to meeting people, of course, there's liars. There's people that were drunk and there's people that were on drugs. You have to weed that out. But I'm pretty good over this amount of time, 17 years now, of reading a witness out. And when you talk to I got one story I'll tell if you're interested later, but I'll tell them my Bubba story. I spoke to a young man from Eastern Kentucky. He was country to the core. He was a true hillbilly. You're talking about a man 6'4", 300 pounds. And he tells me a story of his Bigfoot sighting, and he tells me that he wet himself. And the man's standing there shaking and tears in his eyes. I believe that man. That man saw something. And I guess I'll go ahead and tell a story. Don't let me go on too long, Jeremiah.
You got it. You're good.
But this man's in Eastern Kentucky. Okay, and Kentucky people, I love Kentucky. I'm a lifelong Kentuckian. So anything I say, I'm not belittling anyone. I'm not being condescending. I'm telling it as it is. In Eastern Kentucky, those are a different group of people. They're very seclusive. They're very secluded people. They keep to themselves. It is the hardest time I've ever had getting witnesses to talk is in far Eastern Kentucky, Harlan County, and places like that. Listen, they just don't talk to strangers. And I had to go down there for 20 years. I've been going four-wheeler riding in the mountains of Eastern Kentucky 2 and 3 times a year. So I've been 36 or 38 times. And it took me almost that long to get some of them to start telling me their Bigfoot stories. Some of them that used to laugh at me. Now when I go, they say, "Hey, preacher, we got a new Bigfoot sighting we want to tell you about." So they open up. Finally, I'm not a stranger anymore. And I loved it when I first went out there to the mountains. They called me a flatlander because I live in Western Kentucky where there's not as many hills and mountains. But to my Bubba story, I had heard this young man that had a sighting, and they said he's a heck of a man. He's a monster of a fella. So I go to meet this man. His mama calls him in the house. This is so funny. And I'm 5'8". I weigh about 280. But this guy comes in. She says, "Bubba, come in here and talk to this man about your Bigfoot sighting." And this guy walks in the door, and he almost has a duck to come in the door. I mean, I can't tell you what a monster of a man. I tell people his neck was big around as the top of my leg. He had on bib overalls, and I don't know if he had anything else on under. He was just gigantic. He shook my hand, and my hand was lost in his hand. And he pointed his finger. When I tell this story at presentations, I act it out. But I'm sitting there looking up. I'm looking up at this fella. And he looks down at me and puts his finger right in my face. He said, "Preacher, I'm going to tell you my story, but you better not laugh at me." And I said, "No, sir, I'm not going to laugh at you. There's no way." And so he begins with the story. And he's got a hunting spot that his grandfather had left him. And he sows these, I'll get lost in a lot of the words, but clover and rye. And they sow these fields that the bucks will come to, and it makes their antlers grow bigger, and they get these big old bucks. So He said, I've got a hunting spot. And he said, if I found somebody hunting on my property, I'd whoop them. He said, if I didn't shoot them. And I believed every word he said. And he wasn't being mean. That's just country. And he said, nobody hunts in my spot. So his story was he was up in the tree stand. He'd been there since early morning before daylight. And it starts getting daylight, and he hears something come crashing through the woods, just making an unbelievable sound. And he thinks, well, this has got to be the biggest deer, I've never heard one sound like this. So he stands up in his stand, just a monster of a man. He's got a 30-06. I'll never forget that. Got a scope on it. That's a big gun. And he said, I'm ready for this buck to come out, and I'm going to take me a prize buck. And he said, all of a sudden, out of this deep, dark brush, out steps this 8-foot tall, hair-covered creature. Looks like it's black and maybe a little brownish to it. And is standing there sniffing the air and looking around. He said, and I freeze immediately, and my first thought is this gun enough to take this thing down? He starts doubting the power of his 30-06. And he said, same thing. He raised the scope up and looked at it. And he said, man, if it didn't look like a human being in the face. And he said, at that time, the thing turned and looked at me. And he said, I put the gun down, and he's looking at me. He said, now, preacher, I wet myself. Now, I've learned through the years, Jeremiah, people will lie, but most of the time people will lie to make themselves look better in a situation. It's just human trait. We will lie to make ourselves look better. We'll hyperbole, to enhance a story, but usually not to degrade ourselves. When this boy is standing there 6'3" or 4", 300 pounds or bigger, just looks like a monster of a man. He says he wet himself. That man's tears are going down his face, down his nose. This guy's telling me the truth. Why would he tell me he wet himself? And I know this man had an experience. This guy saw something step out of the woods. It turned after it smelled the air. He said, I believe it smelled me there, and it turned and walked off. And he said, I come out of the woods, and I'll never hunt there ever again. Now, he gave up his favorite hunting spot. He would have whooped any man that he saw in there, and I believe he would have. So I believe in Bigfoot because of the amount of witnesses I've spoken to. And I guess I'll go along this line now. I tell people this when I do my presentation. I'm a non-denominational preacher, but I'm in a Pentecostal background. Kind of a lively church. We get with the program. You won't go to sleep at our church. But one thing I know about Pentecostal holiness people, we call them here in Kentucky, these are people, they don't go to movie theaters. They're still like back in the 20s or 30s. These people don't say heck or darn, because that's cuss words to them. They live a very strict life according to how they see the Bible. I'm not knocking them. I'm explaining. And I respect them because they believe what they believe wholeheartedly. And they're just, a few steps from being Amish in the way they live. They're country people. And I say that to say this. If they tell you a story, you could write it in stone. And I remember interviewing an elderly lady. She was up in her 80s. She was a Pentecostal holiness lady. And she won't say shoot or darn. That's cuss words. And they sure don't lie. They think the devil will come out of the ground and grab them and get a hold of them. So I was interviewing her, and she was in her kitchen window, and this is far eastern Kentucky. And she looked out in her garden, and she said this haint, I'll never forget it. She said this big old haint come walking out of the woods. Now, I looked up and found out that a lot of old-timers here in Kentucky call it spirits or ghosts. They'll call them a haint or something they can't explain, something that's scary to them. She said this haint come walking out of the woods and started picking my vegetables up out of my garden and eating them. She said, I said, what did you do? And country people are so cool. They don't get scared like some of us do. She said, I started hitting on that kitchen window and said, you get out of my garden. You quit eating my food. And she said, it looked at me and it turned around and walked off. And, I'm talking to this woman that is not going to lie to me. She feels her religion is at stake. And people may make fun of that. But I believe witnesses, when they're like these people, that have no reason to lie, that are not going to lie and certainly degrade themselves or tell a lie when she thinks, it's going to be her salvation at stake. And so I begin to believe in Bigfoot mostly because of the witnesses. Now, again, I've heard the howls. I've seen the eyes shine. I went out one time by myself, 2 o'clock in the morning, in Ohio County, Kentucky, which is the next county from where I live. Had a 44 Magnum on my side. I carry that more for not just for a Bigfoot. I don't aim to kill a Bigfoot. But in my years of research, I walked upon a marijuana patch one time at night, and there was a man with a loaded high-powered rifle there. And that scares me pretty good. And I knew I was in the fix because he was watching this crop, see? And I'm smart enough to know that. And he said, what are you doing out here? And I said, fella, I'm going to tell you, but you're not going to believe me. I said, I'm a preacher, and I'm out here looking for Bigfoot. And thank God he started laughing. And he said, well, I think that's crazy. He said, but you don't need to be here. And I said, yes, sir, and if you'll give me time, I'll be gone from here. And he said, you turn and go back that direction. And so, I was scared for my life. And I turned around and left that. And so, another time, not too many years ago, I came in another county and walked up on a meth lab. And I knew immediately when I saw the coolers, the aluminum foil, the batteries, and I pulled my gun out and backed my way out of there. And I thought, boy, I've walked into the wrong situation. I did call the state police, and they did come and say that it had been a working lab, but it had been abandoned recently, or I would have been in big trouble. So I carry a gun for those reasons, snakes and coyotes and any kind of problem like that. So I'm sitting at the foot of a big tree. It's 2:00 in the morning. I'm telling a lot of stories here, Jeremiah, but you just tell me when. But I'm sitting there with my gun. I've got my back to a tree. I've got my audio recorder set out, and I couldn't find nobody to go with me. And I've been there about an hour. And all of a sudden, just in the still of the night, this big tree behind me, I hear it start cracking. And it just falls, boom, shakes the ground. It hits not too far right behind this tree I'm sitting at. And I just freeze. My blood runs cold. And I hear these steps start walking away. Boom, 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 boom. And I knew immediately what would happen. This Bigfoot had pushed this tree down. And you can hear it stepping, just pounding as it's walking off. And I did the strangest thing. I tell this to people. I can't believe it to this day telling you this story. I stood up. I walked to my truck about 100 yards away. And I come home. I left my audio recorders. I left everything there. And about halfway home, I'm thinking, hey, that's what I was out there for. That's what I went to hear. What am I doing? But they called that the fear of fight or flight. That literally hit me. And I ain't saying I was unconscious, but I knew to get in that truck and leave. And I didn't hear that creature approach me. I was sitting there in the dead silence. I don't know how it got up to me like that. And it pushed that big tree down, and it was walking away, and it made me go to the truck and leave. I went back the next day and got all my audio recorders, which were not by me. That I had scheduled them in other places. But I believe in Bigfoot for all those things, and the hoops and the house. But I guess the point I'm making, I believe because of all the witnesses I spoke to.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm right there with you. Once I started taking reports, actually just this summer out in Oregon, like face to face, it becomes very, very real in a different way to you for sure. And I love your background, having that, being a preacher since age 17. So you have probably a very unique way of looking at things. Over the years, have you come to a realization about what you think Bigfoot is, or is that something still up in the air for you?
Isn't that the $64,000 question?
Yeah.
When I first got into the research, I never thought about what it was when I was the minister traveling, getting these stories. Again, I wished I'd have wrote them down. I could write a book. But my life is the ministry, and that's my calling. That's what I do. And I was just asking questions on the side. But since 2007, now I say we record every interview. We write down notes. We at the KBRO, the Kentucky Bigfoot Research Organization, we literally are one of the groups that record our eyewitnesses. We videotape them and play their video of their sighting. It seemed like everybody really loves that. But I thought at first when I got into it in 2007, it was an as yet undiscovered North American bipedal ape of some kind, and I went into the Gigantopithecus offspring deal. But I wasn't into it probably 6 months. And after I interviewed, I like to say from a professional, nobody's a professional, but from being an actual researcher and taking notes and recording, as I talked to people, that left me quickly. They're so human looking. I just love when the people say, and I'll tell some stories in a minute, and these people in my part of Kentucky, they call it a gorilla. But these people, I love reports from people that don't know what Bigfoot is. I love that. They're not prone to make it a Bigfoot. They're not looking for a Bigfoot. So the first thing out of their mouth is gorilla because of its shape and covered in hair. But I thought it was a North American bipedal ape. Now I do not think it. But I still have not come to the conclusion of what I think it is. Now studied in the Bible. I've studied in the Greek and the Hebrew, and I've been blessed to study under Bible scholars who believe in the Aramaic Hebrew and teach the Aramaic Hebrew of the Bible. The first 5 books of the Bible written by Moses was written in Aramaic Hebrew, and there's many secrets hidden in that. So I know about the Nephilim. who were on the earth during the antediluvian age, the fallen angels, all that. I haven't connected them to that. There's a lot of researchers that do. I don't want to be offensive to anybody, anywhere. They have their belief. I have mine. I don't know exactly yet where I place a Bigfoot, but I tell people this. I don't know what it is, but I know who created it. There's not a creature living on this planet that God, the Creator, did not create. Jehovah created them, and so they're created. I don't know what their purpose is. And a lot of people, this is probably something I shouldn't approach. I'm living in a day where the Bigfoot world, from when I started in 2007, is slowly moving over to the paranormal, the paranormal, supernatural side of it. I'm reluctant to go there. And let me tell you this, you might find this interesting. I believe in the supernatural realm. I call it the spiritual realm. I believe in that more than I believe in Bigfoot. As a minister, I don't know how far to go with you. I'm an open-minded minister. I've seen UFOs. I have seen unexplained lights in the woods, but I don't connect that to Bigfoot. I have had supernatural, people use that term, I don't like it, paranormal. I use spiritual. I have seen demonic entities that show themselves. I have had people call them exorcism. I have cast demons out of people in a church surrounding a person who was having problems with demons. I've been there. And you can watch these TV shows and they make it look pretty good. That's Sunday school material compared to what it's really like in real life. So I believe in that. And I believe in extraterrestrial life. And I believe I can find that in my Bible. I believe that we're not the only creation. We're the sheep that went astray of the 99. But anyway, to go there, I'm not connected to Nephilim, but whatever it is, my God created it. And I don't believe I'll be harmed by them. But I also don't believe they're spirits. But anyway, I don't know what they are, Jeremiah, but I know that God created them. I'm still trying to figure out what they are. And a lot of people get on to me and say, you're a preacher. You're not supposed to be out here looking for spirits. And I said, well, I don't think I'm looking for spirits right now. Spirits, as far as I'm concerned, don't poop. They don't have to urinate. Sure. They don't have to have food to eat. They don't have to leave handprints. They don't have to leave their hair on a fence wire. If they're spirits, if they can pop out of a tree, and I'm going to make people upset, and I don't mean to. But, I listen to everybody's theories, and I've always respect people. But I find a lot of times they don't give respect back. If they can pop out of a tree or pop out of an interdimensional wall, then we wouldn't be seeing them, and they could sure stay away from us. But that's me for right now. It's some kind of flesh and blood creature who has some unbelievable traits about them. Listen, people say, well, I've seen one that disappeared. Well, I've seen a deer in the woods. I've been a deer hunter for many years, and I've seen a big 8-point buck deer. I'll never forget walking to my stand, and I thought, you come out behind that tree, buddy, and you're busted. I got you. I've watched you walk in here a couple hundred yards. He stepped behind that tree, and he never come out, and he never left, and I come out of the tree stand and don't see the deer. Now, I can say he disappeared, or I can say that buck was smarter than me. He may have got down and crawled. I've seen deer get down and crawl up under fallen trees to get away from a hunter. I had one buck deer one time come to me. I know I'm speaking at random here, but I remember watching one buck deer back in about 2000, maybe 2001, and I watched him come out of the field into the woods I was in and come straight towards my stand. And when I was still a little too far to shoot, he stopped, smelled the air, and I watched that buck deer. He did not turn around. He began to walk backwards, just like he was putting his foot back in the same tracks. And he backed all the way out of the woods into that field and then turned and took off running. So what I'm trying to say is people say they disappear. It may look like they disappear. And in our presentations at the KBRO, I say this. I believe they are smarter. Now, let me make this plain. I believe they're smarter than we are. Now, they can't operate a phone and they can't be on a computer. But when they're out in the woods, they've lived their whole existence is to be in the woods and stay hidden so much that a lot of people don't even believe they exist. They believe it's a fairy tale. A lot of people laugh at you, though it's not as bad as it used to be. I'm telling you, we're living in a whole different world today than in 2007 and 8, when people would look at you funny and walk away when you mention Bigfoot. And now everywhere I go, I don't care to mention Bigfoot. I wear Bigfoot shirts and Bigfoot hats, and I do that to get people to talk. And people will turn around and say, hey, you believe in Bigfoot? I say, absolutely. They said, let me tell you when I saw one. Yeah. And they're open now telling about it. So it's a different world than even just 17 years ago. But they're smarter than us in the woods. Imagine their whole existence since the days the American Indians were here in the Americas and white man hadn't came yet. And their whole existence is not to be seen. And I believe when we see them, they mean for us to see them. I don't believe we see them by accident very, very often. But people say, well, they could disappear or they quit leaving tracks. I believe there's an explanation. I believe you could send Green Beret, Army Rangers, Navy SEALs out into the woods, and they're not going to find a Bigfoot because we've stepped into their territory. They've had their whole lifetime to perfect being stealth and staying away from us, and you're not going to walk in the woods and find one. And so anyway, I went a long way around that, but I believe in a lot of things. I'm not closed-minded. I've had a lot of supernatural experiences I could share with you, and I believe in spirits, and I believe in the spiritual realm, and I believe in extraterrestrial life. And I've seen lights in the woods when I've been out Bigfooting. Yep. And I've seen UFOs while I've been Bigfooting, but I don't put the Bigfoot in the spaceship. I happen to be out at night, and I find this with a lot of city people. We don't usually spend our time out in the woods at nighttime. We're home in our comfortable heated houses, laying in our comfortable beds. If you get out and go in the woods at nighttime, you're going to see some pretty amazing things. I have taken people from Louisville, Kentucky, a big city, and taken them out Bigfooting. And we're sitting there in our lawn chairs in the pitch black dark of night. And they look in the sky and say, "Oh, my God, what's that?" And I said, "What?" And the lights, I said, "That's satellites." He said, "You can see satellites?" I said, "Yeah, if you get out of Louisville, if you get out of the city and get out in the country, you'll see some pretty amazing things." So I've seen, like the orbs, they call it. I've seen orbs going through the woods. I've seen a little rod of light, go through the woods. I just didn't connect it to Bigfoot. Other people are welcome to if they do. I think I happen to be in the woods at night, and I happen to be seeing things that people don't see because they don't go out in the woods at night like they should. But I don't relate it to Bigfoot. Now, I'm open-minded. If I ever see a spaceship land and a Bigfoot walks out of it, then I'm sold. I'm convinced.
Yeah, it's such a weird thing. And the thing that I've started to notice in the reports that I take is that it's like you have these individuals that have some sort of interaction, or they have a sighting or some sort of close encounter with a Bigfoot, and then they get home and weird stuff starts to happen. And I'm not sure how to explain that because, on the one hand, you've got, like something making tracks, but like what else is going on? I don't know if we really know.
You don't want to hear my theory on that. I don't believe I want your show to be a success, but I do have a theory on that.
Oh, go ahead.
And of course, my theory comes from the viewpoint of a minister.
Yep.
I'm coming from the viewpoint of a Christian and a minister. Mm-hmm. And I don't put my religion, I don't carry a Bible around and beat people over the head. I believe in living the Christian life. I believe my life should be the only Bible people have to read and see that I'm being real and sincere. But I personally believe, and I've heard these, and boy, I don't want any of your listeners to be offended. I'm not out to offend anybody. Again, I will say I listen. I've talked to people. I've been to conferences with speakers who said they came from spaceships. Another speaker said they were a time traveler, and I respected him. I said, "Well, that's good. I see your theory. That's wonderful." But when I give my theory, they just want to cut it off, And I said, "Okay, I'm used to that. It's okay." But if somebody's, my personal opinion, if somebody's in the woods and sees a Bigfoot creature, and they live 300 or 400 miles away, and they go home, and the next night it's standing at the foot of their bed, that is not a Bigfoot. That's a demonic entity. That's a spirit. Mm. If you see a creature step out of a portal and walk and look at you, or starts telling you your secret life and giving you secrets that nobody else could know but a fortune teller, or I've had some people say that they've talked to them and they healed their body of kidney stones or tumors. My opinion, as a Christian, as a minister, is that's a spirit. And the reason somebody said, "Well, how could that be connected?" We're so into Bigfooting, and it'll eat you up. Bigfoot will take your time. You can get so involved. Mm-hmm. I know people that got into it, and everything they buy is Bigfoot, and everything they eat is Bigfoot, and they live, and they can't go out enough nights a week, and that's wonderful. But when you get into something like that, your spirit and soul, your mind gets so open that I believe these demonic entities, they look for an opening. They'll come if they're invited, and what better way than to come looking like a Bigfoot? Boy, I can hear people screaming now. And you've welcomed, you're open to that ideal. And so here's the spirit. If I see something 400 miles away and come home and it's at the foot of my bed, I'm going to get up and start rebuking the devil in Jesus' name. Now, that's me. People could laugh. That's me. That's how I see it. Until I'm convinced otherwise. But the only person I know that could heal, only creature I know that could heal me is the Lord God. And I'm a devout Christian, so I'm going to give all the credit to God. But I'm not going to let something speak to me or tell me my past or read me my children's names. So when people have that, I respect I believe they had that experience. I believe that. But I just, in my mind, think we're dealing with a demonic spirit.
That is so interesting. It is really interesting because a lot of these people that have these situations, like the only way that they can get out of it is, well, most of them is to rebuke using the name of Jesus. And it's like, well, okay, you know.
Isn't that true? I've heard so many stories
Yeah.
of that. There's,
Yeah.
there's something to it. And I'll tell people this, if it is, if I find out Bigfoot is, if you allow me to go this direction for a moment, if I ever found out Bigfoot is a spiritual creature, supernatural, paranormal, again, I call it spiritual, demonic, my days of Bigfooting are over instantly. I'll sell my thermal camera and all my listening devices and all the things I've accumulated, because the Bible tells me, I feel, as a Christian, that I'm not to go looking for evil spirits. I have power and authority over any evil spirit. See, I believe that. People call me fanatic. I believe that. The Bible says that man was given dominion over all the creatures of the field and the animals of the air. We are the dominant species. And as a Christian, I have no fear of any spirit, devil, or demon. But I'm also not supposed to go out and give them stupid challenges. There's an amazing story in the Bible, if I'm allowed to share it.
Absolutely.
There was a man named Sceva, and he had 7 sons. And the story is called The 7 Sons of Sceva. It's in the Bible, New Testament. And I believe New Testament. Let me check myself there. And New Testament. And they were following the Apostle Paul, who's one of the greatest of all the apostles. And they would see Paul pray for people, and they'd be healed of different diseases. But one thing Paul did a lot of, he'd cast demons and devils out of people. And they would manifest. Them demons would come out and come out of that person screaming and hollering. So these 7 sons of Sceva, I'd say they really weren't churchgoers. They were just spectators. And they loved to watch the show, if you will. They loved to watch. Paul was the big hit, It was the circus come to town. So these 7 sons of Sceva said, let's do what Paul does. So the Bible said they went and found him a demon-possessed person. And they came up to him and laid hands on him and said, in the name of Jesus, whom Paul preaches about, come out, you demon. And the demon said to them, Jesus I know, and Paul I know, but who are you? And the Bible says that demon come out of that man and whooped all 7 of them, tore their clothes off, and they went running down the road. So that story basically says that we are not to go looking. If I run into a spirit, and again, I've been in church services and ran into demonic filled people. If people want to believe that, that's fine. I've experienced it. And so, I have authority to pray that I'm not afraid of that demon. But if I'm going out looking for a demon and said, hey, I challenge you to this contest, I'm gonna get my butt whooped, because I'm not to do that. God's not to be made a mockery. It's not a challenge. So anyway, that's one of the theories I look at there. But I love the stories where people say, I saw this Bigfoot and got scared and said, in the name of Jesus, go away. And it went away. And I'm going, don't you see? Don't you see what you're dealing with? But again, that's my theory, my thoughts. I don't want to be offensive to anybody.
Do you think that the theory of mind speak could be somehow related then, or?
I'm not past thinking that's possible. I know infrasound is possible. I've been with people on Bigfoot expeditions who were blasted. I was on one expedition with the BFRO and a man named Ron Bowles.
Yes.
You may have had him on the show. Ron Bowles, fantastic researcher. One of my first expeditions, Ron Bowles was the leader of our group. We were at Standing Stone State Park in Tennessee.
Here we go.
He was in front of us. Yeah. And he was in front of our group walking, and all of a sudden he just stopped. He stopped everybody. And best I can remember, and Ron can correct me if I'm wrong, but he stopped right then. And I believe, he said, everybody stop. And for a minute, I can't say, I don't know if he got dizzy, if he blanked, but he just said, I've been sound blasted. And we stopped the group. And best I remember, we backed out of that area for a little bit. But, he was a man's man. He's a big fella. And I believe him, but he was stopped. But another friend of mine, his first name is John, a researcher. And he went with a female researcher to a place where there had been just recent sightings. And John was a very huge man. He was about 400 pounds, but he could research. He could get out in the woods and walk some. But they went to the place of a sighting. I believe it had happened just a day or two before. They got out of the vehicle, he and the lady, they're walking towards the woods, and John just freezes. And he says, I can't move. I can't move. And she said, what? He said, I believe I'm being blasted. I believe there's another term they use, but he stopped and he said, Don, I couldn't move. He said, I wanted to go forward. But he said, a fear overwhelmed me not to go forward. And he said, I told her I've got to go back to the car. He said, as soon as he turned and didn't take 2 or 3 steps back to the car, it left him. So he stood there a minute and said, give me a minute. And he caught his breath. I'm so sorry, I'm hoarse. I don't usually sound like this. And he said, I thought, well, let's go and go then. He turned around and didn't get 3 steps back to where he was. and it stopped him again instantly. And he said, I was blasted with infrasound. He said, I absolutely believe, just, go away from here. Don't come in here. He said, I told her, we're not going in the woods. And they left. So I believe that's very, very possible, and minds speak. We're perceptive creatures. How many times I've heard somebody say, I feel like somebody's looking at me. Well, I've had that experience in my life, it's standing somewhere, and I think, I feel like somebody's looking at me. Turn around, there's somebody fixated, looking at me. We have that ability. We have that extra sensory perception. I believe that. We're spiritual. Well, think about this, Jeremiah. We are a body, a soul, and a spirit, according to the Bible. We have a body, a soul, and a spirit. We are 2/3 a spiritual being, more than we are 1/3 a natural being. So, I believe in the Bible. Somebody said, do you believe in the spiritual realm? I said, well, I believe in the Bible, and the Bible's probably 75% spiritual.
Yeah, you bet.
I believe in donkeys talked and axe heads floated and water turned to wine.
Man, yeah, absolutely. I'm right there with you. I mean, people don't realize how much, if you take some time to read through it again, I mean, there's some wild stuff in there, man. It's
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's some awesome stuff
I love it.
in there.
I love it.
Awesome stuff. I want to ask. Go ahead. Well, I was going to ask you about a certain location area in Kentucky, just one that's come up a few times recently. Have you heard anything come out of Webster County, Kentucky?
Several sightings I've heard from Webster County, Kentucky. And recently on one of your programs, and forgive my bad memory, I tell people I have half-timers, but you interviewed a young man from Webster County, and he was going to a certain coal mines area site. He had a name for it and was going there. And so I went to look that up, and not far from that, in the area he's going to, is a little community called Wheatcroft. And one of the first reports I got back in the 2007, 8, 9, when I started researching Kentucky primarily, was a story from an elderly lady. It was called the Wheatcroft Bottoms Monster. And I don't know if that young man knew that story or not, but amazing story. This lady was 89 years old. She lived in a little country home out in the woods by herself. She cooked all the time. She was quite the baker, apparently, apple pies and pecan pies, and she was quite a cook. And she was famous for leaving her screen door, she had only the screen door closed. Her kitchen door would be open. Her front living room door would be open. And people that would visit her house said, boy, you could smell the apple pie, you could smell the pecan pie and the breads. And people would go and visit her, and people would buy her pies and cakes and these breads from her, and help her out. And one day she was telling the story. Somebody went over there, and her back screen door at the kitchen was ripped plumb off the hinges and laying in the yard. And somebody asked her what happened, and she said she was cooking apples, baking apples for apple pies. She had 2 or 3 sitting on the table. Of course, the smell's going through the screen. She said this big old tall hairy monster walked up on my porch and grabbed that screen door, and she said it just pulled it plumb off the hinges. It was after her pies. And she took a skillet of hot grease that was cooking, and she grabbed it and threw it on the creature. And it let out this unbelievable scream, help my voice, Jesus. And it turned around and ran off her porch. And I love that. That old country woman, she wasn't scared. She challenged. She wasn't going to take her pies. She threw that hot scalding grease on him. And so they went and, I understand it, repaired her screen door. And the story got started of the Wheatcroft Bottom Monster, and that's in Webster County.
Oh, that's awesome. I'm going to have to look that up, see if there's anything on the internet about it. That is just a fascinating story.
It's amazing, and it brings up another thing. I love how country people, of all my interviews with all the people, I've just said this once, I love speaking to people who don't believe in Bigfoot. I love it because they're not prone to make it a Bigfoot. But I love these country people. This woman is 89 years old, lives by herself, and she didn't scream and run and hide in the corner. Her first thought was to grab that hot skillet of grease and throw it on that creature. Because I love the old woman who said it was a haint. I mean, her idea is also it was a ghost or a spirit. I have a story here in Muhlenberg County, Kentucky, of a lady that had apple trees, again, in her backyard. This is right here in Ohio County, not hardly 7 miles from where I'm sitting right now. And she lived by herself. She may have been in her 90s, if I remember the story correctly. And she heard a noise at her back door, and this creature, something had been stealing apples off her apple tree. She looked out there, and this creature is taking these apples and taking apples off her apple tree. She opens her, this is Kentucky. Now, a lot of city folks won't understand. She opens her door with a 12-gauge double-barrel shotgun and unloads on it. And it takes off screaming and runs off into the woods. And she said, he's going to quit stealing my apples. That's so cool. I just love that. They don't think they get afraid. How dare you take my apples or my apple pie?
That's funny stuff. Oh my goodness. Just Kentucky is one of those really interesting states when it comes to Bigfoot. I like Kentucky, Tennessee down there in the South, but have you ever done any research down in the land between the lakes area regarding
Yes,
Bigfoot?
absolutely. What a red hot area. What a fantastic area. Yes, sir. And the first track that I ever have, the only track, matter of fact, I have ever cast. Now, I've run up on other tracks. I wasn't much at casting at first. But in help my mind, 29, my wife and I were at Land Between the Lakes, and I walked up on a footprint, and I was able to get the material and cast it. And it's 17 and a half inches long. It is 7 inches wide at the toes section, and at the heel of the foot is 5 inches wide. A 5-toed footprint that I got at Land Between the Lakes. I've been down there many times. We went to with a group at a local cemetery down there. I don't want to give the names just yet, but it was one of the bays in the LBL, and we went into a graveyard. We had to walk a mile and a half to this real secluded graveyard. One of the first things we saw when we got there is a black-looking, old-timey, Old English-looking gate around it, which just added to the surroundings. And it was a foggy night. And we walked up to the gate. The first thing I saw was a tombstone that had a man's name that said murdered right across the front. And I thought, man, this is right out of a Stephen King novel. And we stepped right inside the gate of the graveyard. It was total silence. And all of a sudden, this gigantic tree right over in the woods just boom, hits the ground. And we hear a big wood knock. And I said, well, we're at the right place. But LBL, I've been there on several occasions. Probably 7 or 8 times or more, and at different spots. It's so big you don't have to go to the same place. LBL is probably in western part of Kentucky is one of the most lively spots for Bigfoot activity, I'd say, in our whole state.
Well, that's really interesting to hear. Kentucky is a weird state because on the one side you've got LBL, but on the other side, as you kind of mentioned, over there in Harlan County, which is super wild, you've got that Daniel Boone National Forest, which, man, there's some crazy stuff over there. Yeah.
I can tell you that, of course, I'm partial to Kentucky because I'm a Kentuckian. And when the BFRO, they have sites listed in each state, and we highly respect the BFRO. And they have Kentucky somewhere, I don't know, we're 13th or 14th in sightings. But when you get our site, the KBRO site, Charlie Raymond has a site. We have sightings of every Bigfoot sighting that's been turned into us, and Charlie lists them by county. And you go on there and see each county and how many sightings. Of 120 counties in the state of Kentucky, we have sightings. I've always said 98, but I think I've got to update that. We've got sightings out of 100 of 120 counties. They're all over the state of Kentucky. But if you take our over 300, or is it 400? I have to check with Charlie. Our 300 and some odd sightings and add it to the BFRO sightings, we end up somewhere around 5th in the nation in Bigfoot sightings.
Oh, really? Wow. That is really cool. I did not know that. That's awesome.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Oh, wow. There's going to be...
I would like to share one more thing, if I may.
Absolutely.
I'm not watching... I've said this twice, but I was leading up to this. I want to lead up to this. Again, if somebody wants to see Bigfoot or somebody's looking for Bigfoot, and I remember one report, somebody said, I just saw Bigfoot on such and such road over the next county. So I jumped in my vehicle and I go driving over that way. And when I get there, it's a Bigfoot cutout that somebody had standing in their woods. And, so sometimes you get off on the wrong trail, you get on the cold trail. But I loved when I received Bigfoot sightings from people that don't believe in Bigfoot. And I'm sitting here looking at a map I'd like to share with you. In my part of western Kentucky, I'm blessed to be near Ohio County, Kentucky. If you go on the KBRO website, it's one of the higher counties of sightings listed in especially western part of Kentucky. Ohio County is one of the larger counties of the 120 counties in Kentucky, yet it's one of the least industrialized. It has more woods and more old abandoned coal mines, strip mines from back in the 40s and 50s. And they turned it into wildlife refuge, and you can get permits to hunt and fish on these lands. But I'm talking about you could go for miles and miles and miles of just wood, thick, uncut timber, old standing timber. So Ohio County, no wonder, has so many sightings. And I spend the majority of my time researching in Ohio County and the majority of my witnesses. But I'm looking at one section of the map, and I do a presentation called When Bigfoot Sightings Coincide. And I love to share. It's one thing to get a report. Oh, this county, we got one report in the last 50 years. Okay, that's wonderful. But I love it when, what I'm about to tell you, these stories right here, this started coming to me, and I've got a map here, and these people, neither of these people knew the other person. And none of these people I'm going to tell you about believed in Bigfoot. We're talking about old-time farmers. We're talking about old-time country people, and they were under each other. And I'm going to bring the Bible in here again. The Bible said, out of the mouth of any two or three, let a thing be established. Jerry Clyer, the comedian, said what that means is if you hear two or three people from different places tell you the same story, it must be the truth. So I'll start with this. My brother happens to work at a huge granary here in Kentucky, and he's worked there for 25 years or longer, and he deals with farmers. They bring their corn, their wheat, their different grains, and he runs the granary, and they unload their trucks there. So he's friends with the farmers. He knows all the farmers in 2 or 3 counties, and they all know him. He's a very talkative, likable person. He's very he's very personable, and so he loves to tell stories and talk stories about farmers and stuff. So he's a real intricate part of my story. He come to me one day and he said, "Bub, there's an old farmer you need to talk to. I believe he's seeing Bigfoot." So I said, "Yeah, I'd like to talk to him." My brother talked to him in the meantime and said, "My older brother believes in Bigfoot." He researched it. The guy said, "What's a Bigfoot?" I loved it. The old farmer said, "What's a Bigfoot?" And my brother said, "Well, it's a creature people believe exists, and they think they're in Kentucky too." And he said, "No, this is a gorilla that I'm seeing on my farm." And my brother says, "We don't have gorillas in Kentucky." He said, "Well, I guess it escaped from a zoo." I love, this is how their mind is figuring out what they saw. They're trying to make sense of it when there's no sense to be had. So the story of this farmer is that for the last 5 or 6 years, and this was back in about 2009, for 5 or 6 years when he gets in his combine and he's combining his wheat and his corn and out in his fields, there's this gorilla on his property that comes out of the different woods and stands there and watches him. He said, "Now, when I get close to it in the combine, it goes back in the woods and stays hidden. But if I'm going back out in the field, it steps out there and said, it just watches me like it's curious." And he said it's been going on for 4 or 5 years. He describes it as being 8 to 9 foot tall, covered in dark black, brownish hair from head to toe. It stands upright like a man, and when it walks, it really swings its arms. I mean, just unbelievable. I was searching for a word, but just extreme swinging of the arms. That man's explaining a Bigfoot. My brother said, "Sir, you're seeing a Bigfoot." He said, "I don't know what that is." He said, "It's a gorilla escaped from a zoo." Well, we all know it's not a gorilla that escaped from a zoo, but I love it because that man is only trying to explain what he saw. So I marked this on my map. I've got it in front of me on the computer. So about a year later, maybe 2 years later, 2011, we get a report at the KBRO, and this young man is hunting on some property he's bought. He's got his wife and his daughter. Let me slow down. They're not hunting. He's scouting out his hunting area that he's bought. He's got his wife and his daughter and another friend is with him, and they go over to camp out for the night. And when they get there, the river has flooded, and they can't get to their hunting spot. So he gets out close to the woods, and they set up a camp. And him and his friend's going to start scouting for deer sign, getting ready for deer season. So him and his friend are walking away from their campsite to go look, and it's at night. They hear these coyotes howling. So the man said, "I'll stop, just have fun." I yell back at the coyotes. And all of a sudden when he does, something starts yelling back at him, the most unbelievable, long, human lungs couldn't do it, scream, and made all the coyotes shut up. And the man says, "Man, we got to go back to the camp. My wife and daughter, they'd be scared to death." And I'm telling this story best I can remember, but I'm very close to the facts. They come back to the campfire, and it begins a night of this creature, whatever it is walking around, crashing the trees, walking around all night around their camp. They keep the campfire big. His daughter's scared. His wife's nervous. He pulls out his guitar, starts singing, playing songs, and surprisingly, the creature's calm when he's playing his music the way I understood it. But when he stopped, it'd start making noise. And it keeps them up most all night long. And there's something walking around the woods, and I think they holler, "Get away, leave us alone." Well, if I mark this on the map, and he named that area, it's a couple of big knobs or hills, we call them here in Western Kentucky, we call them knobs. And he named it Bigfoot Mountain. That's what the man named it, just for fun, because they believed they was having an experience with the Bigfoot. On the map I'm looking at, the farmer who keeps seeing the gorilla every year that he's harvesting his crops is 3 miles south of the man who's had the sighting at Bigfoot Mountain. Now, that's 3 miles. One fact I've learned when I first started researching is a buck deer, when they get in heat searching for a female, will travel a 5-mile radius. Some of the Bigfoot researchers and the BFRO people believe that a Bigfoot can cover a 30-mile radius. So when I'm telling you the sighting is only 3 miles apart, I mean, that's just like inches. That's very close. And this farmer doesn't know the man who named Bigfoot Mountain. I hope I'm not being confusing. But there's a sighting. So I marked this on my calendar. About 2 years later, I go up to a gas station here in my town, a little country town. I live in a little town of 300. We're a little rural country town here in western Kentucky. Everybody knows everybody. So I'm getting gas, and I've got a Bigfoot sticker on the back of my truck. And the lady pumping the gas says, "Do you believe in Bigfoot, preacher?" And I said, "Yeah, I sure do." She said, "My daddy saw one." I said, "Where at?" She said, "Over on the point in Ohio County." Now, that doesn't make sense to anybody out there listening, but if you know this area, listen, the Bigfoot Mountain I'm just telling you about is on the point in Ohio County. It's a peninsula, a strip of land that is surrounded on one side by the Rough River and on the other side by the Green River, and there's only one way in and one way out of this peninsula. It's 3 or 4 miles long, and there's some thick woods and a lot of riverbanks. And she says on the peninsula, Ohio County, this is right there where Bigfoot Mountain is. So I said, "Would you get a report for your daddy?" She said, "He's in the hospital. He's got heart problems. He's dying." I said, "Would you ask him to relate the story to you? I won't go bother him in the hospital." She said, "I'll ask him if he'll talk to you, preacher." So this girl pumps my gas. She's there all the time. Every day I go in, every week she's there. So the next week I go in, she said, "I spoke to my father, and my father don't really feel like having company, but he related the story in detail. And this man was at the point in Ohio County, and he was fishing, and he caught several catfish, and he kept hearing noises behind him in the woods behind him. He's sitting on the riverbank, and he turns and looks, and he doesn't see anything, and he's thinking, what is that? He could hear something move, and he turned around quick one time after about 30 minutes of this, and he said there's this monster staring at him from behind a tree. It sticks its head out. It's about 7 to 8 foot tall. It's got hair all over its face, a long-looking beard, but it's got a human-looking face. It's really weather-worn. It's rough-looking, skin. He said like an Indian, like an American Indian. And he said, it's looking at me. He said, and I don't know what to do. I freeze. I turn around. I'm thinking, I can't run. I'm too old to run. What am I going to do? And he turns back around, and it's behind another tree. It's come a little bit closer. It's looking. And the old man figured out, again, I love country people. I repeat this a lot. He said, I know what it wants. It wants my fish. And he turns around and says, you're not getting my fish. You can forget about it. I just love that. He said, you're not getting my fish. And he said, this creature turns around and starts walking. It stops behind every other tree and looks back and it walks till it walks out of sight. Well, I go back to my map. Again, please excuse my voice. I go back to my map and I mark exactly where it's at. It is 1 mile north of the Bigfoot Mountain sighting of the man who was surrounded all night, and it's 3 miles farther south to the farmer that sees the gorilla. So here we got Bigfoot sightings, years apart, coinciding in the same area, and I asked each one of these people that I could talk to, do you know such and such farmer? Don't know him. Do you know the man that's over here on Bigfoot Mountain, the Kaufman Road area? Don't know him. So these people are not relating stories that they've heard. They're telling separate stories, and they don't know each other. So as if that ain't enough, my brother comes to me about 4 years ago, one that works at a granary, and said, you need to talk to one of these truck drivers. One of these truck drivers has been seeing a bear that walks upright. It's over 8 foot tall. Well, I said, Bub, bears don't walk upright any length of distance. And he said, well, what you're going to be really interested in is where he saw it at. I said, where did he see it at? On the peninsula in Ohio County at the point. I said, are you kidding me? So I speak to this man, and this man loves to fish along the banks of the Green River. It's just chock full of catfish. And this man finds a secluded spot. He goes down the point of this peninsula, the point in Ohio County, and about halfway down, I'm looking at a map, so I hope I can visualize this. Here's the point where the old man just told the Bigfoot he couldn't have his fish. 1 mile south of that is the man that's had the sighting in Bigfoot Mountain that surrounded his campsite. Literally a half a mile between those 2 points. I mean, it gets mind-blowing. It just gets almost unbelievable. This man is fishing along the bank. He's found a good spot. He's been going there for several years. And he tells my brother, he said, when I'm fishing, of course, I look to the right, I look to the north, I can see the point. Goes down to a little town called Livermore, Kentucky. But he said, if I look through the south, you can see these big woods. Guess what woods that is, Jeremiah? Bigfoot Mountain. That was named by this other fella. He can see it. It's about 500 yards away. And he said, several times when I'm fishing, I see this upright walking bear that walks from the riverbank up through those woods, or the wood line, the edge of the woods, and it'll walk over, and then sometimes I see it walking back. And my brother said, how far does this bear walk on his hind legs? And he said, the whole distance. And my brother said, don't you know that's not a bear? Bears don't walk upright that amount of distance. He said, well, all I know, what else could it be? So here's another man that doesn't believe in Bigfoot. He thinks he's seeing a 7 or 8 foot tall at that distance, he's guessing, walking upright, coming from the river, and he doesn't know any idea. Oh, let me take a drink. He has no idea that that's Bigfoot Mountain, that's where that other sighting took place. And he said, I've seen it on several occasions over the years as I'm fishing. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm looking at my map, and they're just 3 miles, 4 miles apart at the longest. But these 3 sightings are not a half mile apart. I'm coming to the end of this story. I'm telling you, this is when it gets real. This is when it gets amazing, and why I love doing this research. So come down here to this area. I speak to the elderly man and woman who hears screaming behind their house. The woods they live in, they've lived there for 50 years. They call it the Screaming Woods. And he said it's nothing at nighttime to sit on your back porch and hear these loud screams and howls. So they direct me to some people right down the road from them that lives not a half a mile down the road. And I go down there and say, what about these Screaming Woods? And they say, oh, yeah. So we were out here not 2 weekends ago, and we were burning our trash. People here in our part of Kentucky, we don't have dumpsters. You burn your trash in barrels. We have 55-gallon barrels, and you burn your trash at night. And they said we was burning our trash, and said something started screaming from the graveyard across the road over there, and said it started screaming out loud. Said it was shaking the metal on the side of our little shed, and said we quit burning trash and went in the house. These 2 spots are marked on my map, and they're not 1 mile east of the Bigfoot Mountain sighting. And so now I've got 1, 2, 3, 4. I've got 5 sightings on this map, all here, which is about an inch and a half apart on my map. And I'm about to shut up. So I have a nephew. He's 6 foot tall. He weighs about 290. We grow big down here. He thinks I'm the craziest thing. He said, Uncle Donnie, I can't believe that you go out looking for Bigfoot. You know better than I can. He'd laugh at me. I'd say, Elijah, I was out there tonight and heard a Bigfoot howl. He said, yeah, sure. Boy, he just laughs. And he thinks that's the funniest thing. He said, I'm the Bigfoot you're seeing. You know, he's a big giant of a fella. So one night my sister calls me, 11 o'clock at night, and says, you got to talk to Elijah. And I said, what's going on? She said, we were over at church in Centertown in Ohio County, and we were coming back home, which is coming down by Bigfoot Mountain. They got to cross the bridge into McLean County, the county I live in. She said, and he saw Bigfoot. She said, he's white in the face. He can hardly talk. So I get him on the phone. I said, Elijah, what's happening? He said, Uncle Donnie, I'm so sorry that I've made fun of you. I'm so sorry I didn't believe. He's driving. His mama's tired. He just got his license. He wants to drive everywhere. So she's letting him drive, and she's laying over in the driver's seat. They've been to church service. It's about 9 o'clock at night. They're headed back home. And he said, when I rounded the curve, I saw eyes shine. Well, the first thing we do when we see it here in Kentucky, this part, you better slow down because we are eat up with deer. It's nothing to go down the road, see dead deers laying everywhere, where people hit them with their cars. We're overpopulated with deers, and I love it. He said, I saw the eyes shine. My first thought was deer, so I let off the gas, and I started slowing down. He said, as I get closer, I'm thinking, my God, those eyes are awful tall. And he said, as I got close and my headlights hit it, there stands this 7 foot tall creature. Its eyes were as big as golf balls, if not bigger, and they're at least 4 to 5 inches apart. And as I drive by, it turns his head and watches me pass by. He said, I almost wrecked the car, I almost went off the road. And he goes down the road a little bit, and I think how big he is. He says, Mama, you got to get up and drive. I'm shaking so bad I can't drive. I just saw Bigfoot. So she gets out of the car and takes over in the driver's seat and goes to driving. And when they get home, she calls me. So that's 11 o'clock at night. 11 o'clock the next day, I meet him at that place. It was a driveway by an old country house. And I meet him there, and he's still shaking. He said, I don't even want to be here. I said, look, it's daytime. You know, that was last night. And I interviewed his story. It's on the KBRO website. It's on my Facebook page and my YouTube page where I put all my interviews. And he tells the story and says what he saw. He did not believe in Bigfoot. He laughed at it. He thought his Uncle Donnie was crazy for looking for it. And now he's a 100% believer. Guess what? Not a mile from Bigfoot Mountain, and not hardly a quarter of a mile from the people who heard the screams that shook the metal on the roof. So I went up to the house, these people's driveway, and knocked on their door, and I said, excuse me, I'm down here at the end of your driveway. I said, I'm not here to cause any trouble. I just want you folks to know everything's okay. I'm doing an interview with my nephew who saw a Bigfoot last night here at the end of your driveway. And this elderly couple, in their 80s, I'd guess, so we're not surprised at all. So we hear them scream all the time. And it just gets, so I've got 8 spots or 9 marked on this map on the peninsula of Ohio County, Kentucky, and the farthest is 3 miles away. I hope I've painted a picture. That's when Bigfoot sightings coincide. None of these people knew the other people. They did not know there were other sightings, 2 and 3 and 4 years apart. With the one farmer, he's been seeing the gorilla for the last 5 or 6 years that he was harvesting his crops. And these people don't even believe in Bigfoot at all. And when they tell you they saw Bigfoot, listen, we're crazy not to believe them. Anyway, isn't that exciting? I love that.
That is absolutely incredible. That's the kind of stuff I love, where there's no question that it's there in that area because everyone is seeing
Absolutely.
it that is not related. Oh my goodness. That is such a cool story. And I just want to say thank you so much, Don, for coming on the show and for sharing what you've experienced over these almost 20 years and just some incredible stories. And are there ways that someone could reach out to you if they're listening? They'd be like, oh man, I also have something going on in the same area or anything like that.
Absolutely. First and foremost, they can go onto Facebook and look up KBRO, Kentucky Bigfoot Research Organization. They're welcome to do that. Charlie Raymond, a wonderful organization. He is an honest and he has integrity. He's among Bigfoot researchers. He's held in high esteem. Of course, they can find my Bigfoot page under Don Neal. That's Neal, and it's under Biggyfoot. I also have Biggyfoot in the name, and they can contact me there. And I have a YouTube page under D, my first letter of my name, Neal. And be glad to hear anybody's report. And I just want people to know we're here to believe you. We're not going to make fun of you. And we're trying to do scientific research. And Charlie Raymond is working on presenting to our state that if we can find evidence and proof that Bigfoot's here in Kentucky, to make them a protected species. So we're a no-kill group, and we believe. So if anybody's got a report, we would love to hear from you. We're very interested.
Oh, that's incredible. I didn't know that. That is great to hear. But man, Don, thank you so much for coming on the show. I'm sure we will be in touch and keep doing the good work down there in the great state of Kentucky.
Thank you for this great opportunity, Jeremiah. And again, I'm so sorry I've been hoarse. This is not how I usually sound, but thank you for this opportunity.
Yes, sir.
Just wanted to take a few minutes to say thank you to you, all my listeners, for listening to the podcast. Please take a minute to help out the show by subscribing on YouTube, making sure you hit the bell so you don't miss any notifications, and share the episode on YouTube with a friend. Also, if you're listening to us on a podcast, thank you so much. Make sure that you're subscribed, share the show with a friend. Really, it's all about sharing the show wherever you can. If you've had a Bigfoot encounter related to the following or know someone who has, please reach out to me at bigfootsociety@gmail.com or pass on my email. Here's a list: the Subtle Lake area of Oregon, Rainbow, Oregon, McKinsey Bridge area, Sweet Home, pretty much that entire area, the north part, if you get what I mean. I'll see you back next time, listeners. Sasquatch Summerfest this year, July 11th through the 12th. It's going to be fantastic. July 11th through 12th in Green Waters Park in Oak Ridge, Oregon. And listeners, if you're going to go, you can get a 2-day ticket for the cost of one if you use the code BFS, like Bigfoot Society, but BFS, and it'll get you some off your cost. Priscilla was nice enough to provide that
for my listeners. So there you go. I look forward to seeing you there. So make sure you head over to www.sasquatchsummerfest.com and pick up your tickets today.